The referee raises the whistle to his lips, and for one endless heartbeat, the entire stadium falls into an almost impossible silence. More than 80,000 people stand motionless, unable to blink, unable to breathe, as every eye follows the ball drifting harmlessly toward the touchline. An Argentine defender clears it one final time, the clock reaches its limit, and then the whistle cuts through the night. The sound lasts only a second, yet it instantly changes history. Before anyone can process what has happened, the silence shatters into an explosion of emotion unlike anything football has witnessed in decades. Players in the famous sky blue and white stripes collapse onto the grass, some screaming toward the heavens, others unable to move at all as tears stream down their faces. In Buenos Aires, entire apartment buildings begin shaking as millions of supporters erupt simultaneously, while church bells ring, fireworks illuminate the skyline, and strangers embrace in the middle of the streets as though they had been waiting for this single moment their entire lives. Argentina has done it again. Against every expectation, against every prediction, the Albiceleste have conquered the footballing world once more. Only minutes earlier, the atmosphere had been almost unbearable. The scoreboard showed Argentina leading by a single goal, yet nobody inside the stadium believed the match was truly over. Every clearance felt dangerously short. Every challenge seemed capable of deciding the destiny of an entire nation, and every ticking second echoed louder than the roar of the crowd. The opposition pushed relentlessly, throwing every player forward in one final attempt to force extra time, while Argentina defended with the desperate determination of a team that understood they were protecting far more than a scoreline. The final attack began deep inside midfield, where one misplaced pass instantly ignited a wave of panic across the Argentine bench. The opposing striker accelerated into open space, drawing defenders backward with every touch, while thousands of Argentine supporters instinctively covered their faces, unable to watch what seemed destined to become the tournament's defining moment. The ball was crossed into the penalty area, rising beneath the floodlights before hanging in the air for what felt like an eternity. Bodies collided, boots reached desperately toward the ball, and then Argentina's captain launched himself higher than everyone else, meeting it with a thunderous header that sent it spinning far beyond midfield. It was neither graceful nor spectacular, but in that instant, beauty no longer mattered. Survival did. The referee glanced at his watch one final time, allowed only a few more desperate seconds to pass, and finally brought the greatest football tournament on earth to its dramatic conclusion. Instantly, the pressure that had weighed upon every player throughout the competition dissolved into overwhelming emotion. Several footballers collapsed exactly where they stood, exhausted beyond words after carrying the hopes of an entire nation through weeks of impossible expectation. Others sprinted aimlessly across the pitch, laughing, crying, and embracing anyone they could reach, while substitutes and coaching staff flooded onto the field without caring where they were running. The captain stood alone for a brief moment near the centre circle, staring toward the sky as though searching for someone who was no longer there. Throughout the tournament, one invisible presence had followed Argentina everywhere. Every chant inside every stadium, every mural painted back home, and every television discussion eventually returned to the same name: Lionel Messi. Even though this new generation had written its own extraordinary story, everyone understood that it had been inspired by the legacy left behind by the man who had transformed Argentine football forever. Tonight was not about replacing him. It was about proving that the belief he had restored in an entire nation would continue long after his final match. Inside the stands, emotions spilled over in every direction. Elderly supporters who still remembered Argentina's triumphs decades earlier held their grandchildren tightly, tears flowing freely as generations separated by half a century celebrated together. Young fans who had grown up believing they might never experience another World Cup victory screamed until their voices disappeared completely, while thousands of blue and white flags moved through the stadium like waves rolling across the ocean. Cameras searched desperately for unforgettable faces, capturing children laughing uncontrollably, parents crying into each other's shoulders, and complete strangers embracing as though they had shared a lifetime together. Thousands of kilometers away, Argentina itself had transformed into one endless celebration, long before the players even reached the trophy ceremony. In Buenos Aires, the obelisk vanished beneath a sea of supporters dressed in sky blue and white, every balcony overflowing with flags, banners, and families who had abandoned sleep for something far more important. The streets became rivers of singing voices, car horns blended with drums, and fireworks painted the night sky so brightly that darkness itself seemed to disappear. Across Rosario, Córdoba, Mendoza, and countless smaller towns, people poured from their homes within seconds of the final whistle, climbing onto rooftops, dancing on buses, and filling every public square with a joy that words struggled to capture. In neighborhoods where economic hardship had long overshadowed daily life, football once again became something far greater than a game. For a few extraordinary hours, differences disappeared completely. Wealthy districts and working-class communities celebrated side by side, united not by politics, religion, or circumstance, but by 11 players wearing the same striped shirt. Restaurants stopped serving food because every employee had joined customers outside. Taxi drivers abandoned their cars to celebrate with strangers. Police officers smiled as supporters climbed onto traffic lights, choosing not to restore order because everyone understood that moments like these could never truly be controlled. Inside homes scattered across the country, millions of private stories unfolded simultaneously. An elderly woman carefully unfolded the same Argentine flag she had preserved for decades, believing she might never use it again. A father lifted his young daughter onto his shoulders as they watched the trophy ceremony together, quietly telling her that she would remember this night for the rest of her life. In another apartment, 3 brothers who had spent years living in different countries celebrated through a video call, unable to hug each other in person, yet sharing tears that no distance could separate. Back inside the stadium, the celebrations became increasingly surreal. Television cameras followed players as they wandered across the pitch almost aimlessly, touching the grass beneath their boots, as though trying to convince themselves that everything around them was real. One defender slowly removed his captain's armband and kissed it, before placing it back around his arm, while another player searched desperately through the crowd until he finally spotted his parents several rows above the tunnel. Their eyes met for only a few seconds, before emotion overwhelmed them completely. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Meanwhile, the World Cup trophy waited patiently beneath brilliant stadium lights, reflecting thousands of camera flashes as photographers gathered around the podium. Every player dreams of lifting it. Countless legends spend entire careers chasing it without ever succeeding. Tonight, however, destiny had chosen Argentina once again, and every supporter inside the stadium instinctively rose to their feet as the captains slowly approached the golden prize. The noise built gradually before becoming almost impossible to comprehend, wave after wave of voices joining together until the entire arena seemed to vibrate beneath their feet. As his hands finally wrapped around the trophy and lifted it high into the air, golden confetti exploded across the stadium, fireworks burst above the roof, and the famous sky blue and white ribbons danced beneath the floodlights. The players screamed with pure disbelief, supporters sang louder than ever before, and somewhere beyond the deafening celebration, a new chapter in Argentina's footballing history quietly began to write itself. Yet, as unforgettable as the victory itself would become, what happened during the following hours, the following days, and eventually the following years would transform this triumph into something far greater than anyone inside that stadium could possibly imagine. The celebrations did not fade with the sunrise. If anything, they became even more extraordinary. As the first rays of light spread across Buenos Aires, millions of Argentinians suddenly realized they had never gone to bed. Entire neighborhoods were still singing the same chants that had echoed through the streets hours earlier, while cafes opened not to serve breakfast, but to welcome exhausted supporters who refused to let the night come to an end. The city looked less like a capital and more like the beating heart of a nation that had rediscovered something it feared could never be repeated. Every balcony displayed the Argentine flag, every passing car sounded its horn in celebration, and every conversation, whether between lifelong friends or complete strangers, began with exactly the same smile. Within minutes, the victory dominated every major headline across the world. Newspapers abandoned carefully prepared front pages and rushed new editions into print, while television networks interrupted regular programming to cover scenes unfolding throughout Argentina. In New York, giant digital billboards displayed photographs of the captain raising the World Cup above his head. In Madrid, sports channels replayed the final whistle over and over again, commentators struggling to find words capable of matching the emotion pouring from the screen. In Rome, cafes filled with supporters who applauded despite having no connection to Argentina at all, simply because they understood they had witnessed one of those rare sporting moments that transcended nationality. Even countries that had desperately hoped to stop Argentina found themselves speaking with admiration rather than disappointment. Brazilian analysts praised the resilience shown throughout the tournament, admitting that winning consecutive World Cups demanded a mentality possessed by only the greatest footballing nations. French newspapers described the final as one of the most emotionally charged championships in modern history, while English commentators argued that the victory had officially established this Argentine generation alongside the greatest teams ever assembled. The debate was no longer about whether they deserved their place in history. It was about where exactly that place should be. Across social media, the reaction became almost impossible to measure. Videos of the final whistle spread faster than any sporting event in recent memory. Millions watched supporters collapse into tears outside the obelisk, children climbing onto their parents' shoulders, waving oversized Argentine flags, elderly couples embracing silently on apartment balconies, and entire schools stopping lessons so students could celebrate together. Some of the most viewed clips contained no football at all. Instead, they showed ordinary people experiencing extraordinary emotion, reminding the world that the greatest victories are often measured not by trophies, but by the memories they create. Former football legends watched the celebrations with unmistakable pride. Players who had once carried the weight of Argentina's expectations themselves appeared on television smiling like lifelong supporters rather than retired professionals. Some admitted they had expected this generation to struggle beneath the enormous pressure of defending a World Cup title. Yet what they witnessed instead was a team that seemed strengthened by expectation rather than burdened by it. One legendary captain quietly remarked that greatness is never proven by winning once, but by returning to the summit when the entire world expects you to fall. One name inevitably surfaced in every conversation. Lionel Messi had long since stepped away from international football, yet his presence could still be felt in every celebration. Cameras eventually found him watching the final from a private suite, applauding with tears in his eyes as the players below lifted the trophy into the night sky. He did not rush onto the pitch. He did not attempt to make the moment about himself. Instead, he simply smiled, knowing that the dream he had fought for throughout his entire career had grown into something far larger than one generation. The torch had not merely been passed. It had been carried forward with extraordinary dignity. The players themselves quickly discovered that life would never feel ordinary again. Airports transformed into seas of humanity wherever they travelled. Streets filled within minutes whenever word spread that one of the champions might appear. Children waited for hours outside training grounds, hoping to catch a single glimpse of the footballers whose names had suddenly become woven into the country's history. They were no longer simply elite athletes. They had become symbols of perseverance, belief, and unity during a period when Argentina desperately needed all three. Perhaps the greatest transformation unfolded far away from television cameras. Across villages hidden among Patagonia's mountains, crowded neighborhoods in Rosario, and quiet suburbs surrounding Córdoba, thousands of children ran outside carrying footballs that had suddenly become far more than toys. Empty streets became improvised stadiums. Schoolyards echoed with commentators' voices imitated by laughing teenagers. Homemade trophies fashioned from cardboard and aluminium foil appeared in living rooms across the country, while every child insisted on recreating the winning goal rather than inventing their own celebration. Football academies experienced an unprecedented surge in registrations. Coaches who had spent years searching for talented youngsters suddenly found themselves welcoming hundreds of hopeful children every week, each convinced that wearing Argentina's famous striped shirt one day was no longer an impossible fantasy. Parents willingly drove for hours to attend youth training sessions, believing that somewhere among these children, another extraordinary generation might already be taking shape. The victory had done something no tactical system or coaching philosophy could ever achieve. It had made millions genuinely believe. The impact extended beyond football itself. Tourism increased dramatically as supporters from around the world travelled to experience the atmosphere that had captivated the planet. Murals celebrating the champions covered buildings throughout Buenos Aires, Rosario, and Mendoza, transforming entire neighbourhoods into open-air museums dedicated to the greatest sporting achievement of a generation. Musicians composed songs inspired by the tournament, filmmakers announced ambitious documentaries, and publishers rushed to release books chronicling every unforgettable moment. What had begun as a football triumph gradually evolved into one of the defining cultural events of modern Argentina. Elsewhere, the footballing world quietly began to change. Coaches across Europe analysed Argentina's campaign frame by frame, searching for the secret behind their remarkable consistency. Some expected revolutionary tactics, others anticipated cutting-edge physical preparation, but many reached a far simpler conclusion. Argentina had succeeded because every player understood something beyond systems and statistics. They played not as 11 individuals sharing the same shirt, but as one collective story stretching across generations. Every tackle, every pass, and every sprint seemed driven by the knowledge that millions back home believed in them completely. That realization began influencing clubs and national teams everywhere. Youth academies placed greater emphasis on leadership, character, and resilience, alongside technical ability. Coaches spoke less about formations and more about identity. Sports psychologists became central figures inside dressing rooms, helping players understand that the strongest teams are often built long before the opening whistle. In subtle ways, the philosophy behind Argentine football began spreading far beyond South America, reshaping conversations about success at every level of the game. For rival nations, the victory became both inspiration and warning. Brazil immediately intensified its search for the next generation capable of reclaiming football's highest prize. France accelerated investment in youth development, determined not to watch another era dominated by the albiceleste. Spain, Germany, and England launched ambitious long-term projects, recognizing that the standards required to become world champions had risen once again. Argentina had not simply won another tournament, it had forced the rest of football to evolve. Months passed, yet the memories remained astonishingly vivid. Whenever supporters described where they had been during the final whistle, their stories sounded remarkably similar despite unfolding in completely different places. Some remembered standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers outside giant public screens. Others recalled watching alone before suddenly finding themselves surrounded by celebrating neighbours. A few spoke of hearing the roar from nearby streets before seeing the result themselves, instantly understanding what had happened without needing to look at a television. Years later, historians would write that this victory represented far more than the successful defence of a World Cup. It marked the moment Argentina transformed from a nation celebrating one legendary generation into a country that had built a lasting footballing identity capable of surviving every change in players, coaches, and eras. Statues honouring the champions appeared outside stadiums, documentaries preserved every unforgettable scene, and schoolchildren grew up studying the tournament as though it were part of the nation's cultural heritage rather than merely sporting history. Decades from now, those who witnessed that unforgettable night would still remember the smallest details. They would remember the impossible silence before the final whistle, the explosion of joy that followed, the confetti falling beneath brilliant stadium lights, the songs echoing through Buenos Aires until sunrise, and the feeling that, for just a little while, an entire country had forgotten every hardship because football had reminded it who it was. Long after the medals had gathered dust, after new champions had lifted the trophy and fresh generations had taken the field, that single night in 2026 would continue to shine brighter than the passing years. Because some victories are remembered for the titles they bring, while others become immortal for the hope they awaken. Argentina's triumph belonged to the second kind, becoming a story that future generations would never simply read about, but inherit, celebrate, and carry forward as part of the nation's soul.